When we are in gratitude, it comes more from fullness, where I'm actualizing, and it comes out of love as opposed to lack. And so there's less the grasping, there's this overflowing abundance.
Hey everyone, welcome back. It's Ashley, and today I am joined by Dr. Yosi Amram. Yosi is a licensed clinical psychologist, leadership coach, and researcher whose journey bridges many worlds, ultimately leading him to pioneering work in the field of spiritual intelligence. He's built and led companies to successful IPOs, guided business leaders and CEOs, and is dedicated to understanding how we unlock our deepest potential. Work that he brings to life in his book, Spiritually Intelligent Leadership: How to Inspire by Being Inspired. In this conversation, we'll explore Yosi's journey in spiritual awakening, how his path of ambition, breakdown, and transformation reshape the way that he sees leadership, purpose, and what it means to live with alignment. We have a lot to unpack and discover here. So, with that, Yosi, welcome to the podcast. Thanks so much for joining me.
Thank you, Ashley, for that beautiful introduction. Wow. Hopefully, I won't disappoint you and the audience. We'll see.
No, I'm really looking forward to this conversation. And, this podcast is about our personal journeys and the seasons and moments in our lives that test us, that shape us, and often inspire the work that we're doing today. So, you have lived through many chapters of growth and change. Can you share a bit about where you were earlier in your life and your career and what led to the shift in psychology and the study of spiritual intelligence?
Well, let's see if I could do that succinctly. It might be a challenge. But yeah, I was born and raised in Israel, a war-torn part of the world, and horrific things have been going on there. Luckily, when I finished my high school and was drafted into the military, like all young men in Israel, it was peaceful time, and I was a math and science nerd kid, but to my surprise, I garnered the fastest promotion record in the history of my regiment and had all these leadership awards. So I excelled in the military, the command and control model of leadership, but it really chafed at my soul, and I felt like I wanted to someday try and build an organization based on more humanistic principles that help people actualize and develop their individual potential. And while the military is necessary and a powerful model in battle, you can't take people into a conference room and do brainstorming. Someone has to call the shots, so to speak. I wanted to do it differently, and that kind of led to my lifelong dream of coming to the U.S. as becoming a tech entrepreneur, which I was able to do twice. I started two companies and was the CEO and took them public, etc. And with one of them was the early days of the internet, or before the internet, the company was called Individual Inc., which stood for the concept of actualizing each individual employee and also customizing, creating personal newspapers that were individualized for each customer. So you'd get Ashley's Morning News on your fax machine. You might not remember those days, or you're too young, but it used to be before the internet, the fastest way to get information was on fax. And so we produced individualized interactive newspapers that had self-learning. People would tell us which articles were relevant or not, etc. And it would learn. But then the internet came, and it was a big revolution that threatened our business. And I had been working 70, 80 hours a week and raised tens of millions of dollars from top venture capitalists. And there was a lot of pressure to keep growing. Wasn't clear how we can migrate our business to the internet. And it was clear that all the information we were selling on a premium basis was going to become free and ad supported on the internet. And so I kind of froze and got depressed and disappeared for a couple of weeks to get my head straight. And my employees like, where's Yosi? What's going on? But I came back and I persevered. We eventually turned the business into an internet business, and I took it public, and the stock was rising, and it was the early days of the internet in 96, before Google and Facebook, and it was wide open field, and I wanted to capitalize on a lot of these opportunities. And one day when I was trying to relax, I was getting a massage, a deep tissue massage, but I didn't know, but it took me into a deep state of dissolving my ego and creating a spiritual awakening. But that spiritual awakening short circuited my mind and I couldn't make sense of it. I was looking through the face crater. The floor looked like it felt like inside of me, and it just didn't make sense. And so that threw me into a manic episode. And I was trying to run this public company in this manic state. I wanted everything done yesterday, and my team and the board couldn't keep up. So they put me on what they call the voluntary leave of absence. Nothing voluntary about it. I fought them. I resigned. They fired me. It was a big drama in the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, etc. But ultimately, I basically was pushed out and lost my baby, the company, which was very painful. And I went from being at the top echelon of Silicon Valley, where everybody sought my company, to being canceled and nobody would return my phone calls or emails and so on. But that led me to ask the deeper questions. Why was I so identified with the business? Why did I overwork myself? What was this spiritual awakening? Was it real? Was it delusional? And that really changed the direction of my life, where I went back and studied psychology to become a clinical psychologist and discovered the term spiritual intelligence, which I was intrigued by, but it wasn't really defined. And I wanted to study it scientifically to see how it relates to leadership. I knew about all the research with emotional intelligence and its benefits. And so I that's the path I set on, to define what it is, and showed that leaders with greater spiritual intelligence are more effective, even when you control for emotional intelligence. So spiritual intelligence complements emotional intelligence. And since then, a lot of research has shown its many benefits. So these days, my calling, my purpose is to help awaken greater spiritual intelligence in myself and the world. Anyway, I've said a lot. It's been a long journey. I'll stop there if you wanna double click on anything or move on.
Yeah, definitely. I appreciate you taking us through that journey. I think there's so much there. Of course, leading the companies, being super successful within the tech world and within business, and then having these moments in your life, the awakening that you described. You also mentioned emotional intelligence, and I want to go there because I think people are familiar with that term, emotional intelligence, and how it impacts our relationships and even in leadership as well too. But there's a differentiator there between emotional intelligence and spiritual intelligence. So can you go a little bit deeper on that, help us understand the difference between the two, and then what it looks like whenever spiritual intelligence is present?
Okay, great. So, yeah, the terms emotional intelligence was put forth by two academicians in 1990, Solovey and Meyer. It was popularized by Daniel Goleman in a book by that name. But up until then, we used to think there's a dichotomy between emotion and reason. I said, Ashley, do you know people in your life that are emotional? That might not be the greatest compliment. It's people that are prone to drama and perhaps dysregulation, etc. But then there's emotional intelligence, like, wow, we can use emotional information and resources to help us, in daily life. And that's emotional intelligence, the ability to draw on emotional resources and information to function better. And so, by analogy, spiritual intelligence, we have a similar dichotomy between spiritual and practical. Spiritual is woo woo and practical is practical. But spiritual intelligence says, no, there are these spiritual qualities and resources. And like emotional intelligence, drawing on emotional resources, spiritual intelligence says, drawing on spiritual resources and embodying spiritual qualities. So, what are these spiritual resources and qualities? So, these are the qualities that have been celebrated and seen as virtues throughout all the world's wisdom traditions for thousands of years, from the Greeks to the Buddhists to the Hindu to the Muslims to the Jews, the Christians, the shamans. They all talk about living a life of purpose and service and trust and gratitude and humility and compassion and forgiveness and integrity, etc. So these are universal qualities that have been celebrated throughout the world's spiritual tradition. So In my research, when I said, hey, I wanted to understand what this thing called spiritual intelligence, I interviewed 71 teachers across all these traditions. And I asked them, how does their life get informed by their spirituality? So, regardless of their theology, if you're a Buddhist, you may believe there's no self and there's reincarnation, etc. If you're Muslim, you believe Muhammad was the final prophet. If you're Christian, you believe Jesus was the Messiah, whatever. So each tradition has its cosmology and theology. But across all of them, they talked about these qualities of purpose, service, trust, compassion, forgiveness that lead to good life for the individual. They're pro individual and they're pro societal. And what's interesting, so the reason I call it spiritual intelligence is that they're all uniform across all the world's spiritual traditions, number one. Two, these qualities naturally, spontaneously arise when we are connected to our essence. You might call it our spirit, our life force energy. The word spirit comes from Latin, spiritus, the animating breath of life, which basically means our life force. When we're connected and rooted to our spark of life, our life force energy, these qualities naturally emerge. So they are complementary. There is some correlation with emotional intelligence. For example, in emotional intelligence, we talk about self-regulation. So we might experience anger, but with emotional intelligence, we're aware of it, and we don't do crazy stuff in a bout of anger, cursing, throwing shoes, breaking plates, whatever, punching someone out of a fit of rage or anger. So that's self-regulation. Now, in spiritual intelligence, there's something analogous, but actually goes a little deeper, and it's called equanimity. And you have this thing called self-knowledge. So all the traditions, starting with the Greeks, said, know thyself. With emotional intelligence, what we're focused on knowing is our emotions. With spiritual intelligence, we're focused on knowing ourselves in a deeper way, which is our essence, which is our spirit, knowing who and what we are at the most essential level. So both of them involve some level of self-awareness, but spiritual intelligence goes deeper and has something called equanimity, which is beyond self-regulation, about not acting out of anger, but we could be rooted in our depth. So it's like in the ocean, you might have waves at the surface and a lot of storm, but in your depth, in the depths near the floor of the ocean, it's calm, it's peaceful. So with spiritual intelligence, you can experience equanimity. So that can look like self-regulation, but it goes a little further than that. Then there are things that are uniquely in the realm of spiritual intelligence, like egolessness and purpose and other qualities that are purely in the domain of spiritual intelligence. And then there's some things that are purely in the domain of emotional intelligence, like reading someone else's emotions or being able to influence other people's emotions. So there's some overlap between these, and they show correlations in my research and other research, but they also show differentiation, and they are complementary.
So, how does one, let's say somebody is just learning about spiritual intelligence for the first time in that term, how do you start tapping into that and uncovering some of this within yourself in that way? Because I think, you mentioned purpose. Oftentimes, I think that's a big life question is, what is my purpose?
Yeah, well, it's a big journey. It's a big thing, as you said. So where do we start? And that's great. We have to start somewhere, put one foot in front of another, and step down the path. So yeah, purpose is a big question about our life, and we ask like, why are we here? What's my purpose? And I just want to say that it's not a once and done thing. Our purpose when we are 5 years old, it's to learn to play and ride the bike and tie our shoes. And when we are in college, our purpose is a little different. And then at some point, our purpose might be to build a career and build a family, etc. And so, our purpose evolves in different stages of life. But in all of those, I would say there's something common, which is looking at our gifts, what life has given us, and actualizing them to grow and contribute. So one of the questions we always ask ourselves is like, what has been the gift that life has given me? And each of us are very different. Some people might be really naturally good with math and science and they want to become programmers or software engineers. Someone else is very good listener and they ask good questions and maybe they are a podcast host or maybe they're a therapist or whatever it is. Someone else has a great sense of humor and they like to tell jokes and they're a comedian. Someone else is great with graphic design and they're an artist or they're a graphic designer, etc. But in each of those cases, we're actualizing a talent that we're endowed with. So if you have a birthday and a friend of yours brings you a gift, Ashley, and then you say, "Oh, thank you very much." You put it in the closet. There's a party, etc. Then they come to you next year or a month later and say, "Ashley, did you open up my present?" It's like, "Oh no, I forgot. It's in my closet." So it's like, oh, they're going to be disappointed because they're giving you the gift, they want you to use it. So life gives each of us these gifts, and we're all different. We're all unique. We all have different talents, and life is kind of wants us to unpack those gifts and use them and exercise them to contribute. And when we do that, we feel actualized. We have a sense of mastery, and we enhance our sense of belonging because we're contributing to life. We're contributing to other people. So that connects us to something. And so, but that's an inquiry that someone has to go through and it evolves. Someone can go through a stage where their greatest gift is nurturing and whatever, and they're building a family and taking care of their children. And then before you know it, the kids fly out the nest. And it's like, okay, well, what's my purpose? What's my meaning now? And we all go through these transitions. We reinvent ourselves.
I really like that because to me, it seems like you're saying, it can be ever evolving. And I think sometimes we think, "Oh, we need to just have this one main big purpose in our life," but it's just like anything else, and I love how you go back to what's your purpose, when you're 5 years old, it's gonna be different than, as you're growing up as a teenager, or maybe you're going to school and then you're going to college, and so I really appreciate that because it gives ourselves that permission to continue to be open to ourselves and learn more about ourselves, explore more about ourselves. And I think that also translates as well into work. Like, let's say if you're an entrepreneur, you're a business owner, also allowing that vision to change too, where your vision in this moment in the short term may be this, but long term it's this, but allowing that to continue to evolve and change. I think it breaks down the boxes that we can put ourselves in.
Yeah, exactly. Because I'm glad you're bringing it. The same idea as it applies at the organization, at the business level. The market changes, the technology changes, the competitive landscape change. So you might have the same overarching mission as a company, but your strategy, your vision, your purpose changes and how you go about it. And sometimes companies completely reinvent themselves, just like individuals do. So yeah, that gives us more freedom, more possibilities, and we're not attached and fixated, which makes us more fragile because we think, okay, this is me and this is what I'm identified with. And if I get blocked, then it's like I have failed. And I'm like, no, okay, you gotta reinvent yourself, surrender your individual egoic will to something bigger. And what is life asking of me now in this stage? How can I contribute in a bigger way? How can I actualize myself in a new way? And that makes us more resilient and more creative.
I'd like to go I'd like to talk a little bit about the cost of high achievement. I personally have always struggled with performance pressure in different ways as an athlete and how it showed up in different areas of life and work, just always having to achieve, achieve, achieve. So I'd love your take on this. How do you coach other leaders now that are in those environments where there is a lot of pressure to achieve and succeed?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And it's something I still struggle with. So if you think that I've graduated, sometimes we teach what we have to learn. So yeah, but I was just going back to what I was talking about. My pressure to achieve is what got me to work 70, 80 hours a week, which got me to burn out. And so then I had to learn a bunch of self-care. But our egos are, as some tradition would say, are thieves. So we could take the self-care and try and do so much, like, oh, I'm going to meditate more, and I'm going to exercise more, and I'm going to do this and that, and there's only 24 hours a day. And so I have, tried to cram more self-care, which then also starts to become stressful. And so it's tricky, and we just can learn to relax. And the research highlights what you're saying, which is that people that are very perfectionistic and are very conscientious, they achieve a lot, but they also stress themselves out, and they're not necessarily the most fulfilled, happiest. Whereas people that focus more on getting satisfied, are more centered, more grounded, more relaxed, etc. So one of the things, and again, this is a danger of getting co-opted and becoming one more thing, but related to spiritual intelligence, is the quality of gratitude. And so, counting our blessings and learning to be content with what we already have, rather than always seeking that next thing, that next high, that what have you, because otherwise it's like we can have millions of dollars, but we're always wanting more, and we're feeling poor. Well, I don't have enough because I have 1 million, my neighbor has 2 million. I have one car, they have two cars. It could be at whatever level. I have clients that are worth hundreds of millions, and they're like still not satisfied. They want to get to billions, and
It doesn't end. It's
it
just the next
doesn't
thing,
end.
the next thing, the next thing.
Yeah, and it can become an addiction. But, what I try and do is to help people tune in what happens to them when they are in this attitude of gratitude, and there's a sense of well-being and a fulfillment and ease, and it feels good, and what happens when we are on this striving. Now, when we are in gratitude, it doesn't mean we're lazy and we just sit on our couch and watch Netflix all day. But it doesn't come from egoic ambition. It doesn't come from deficiency, like I must get to, so and so level of achievement to make my life worthwhile and meaningful. It comes more from fullness, where I'm actualizing, and it comes out of love as opposed to lack. It's not like, oh,
Mm.
my life is not meaningful unless I make $10 million. No, I just, want to build this business, and I enjoy the creativity, and I enjoy working with my employees, and I really feel that this is meaningful, helping these customers. It could be in a business, it could be in a nonprofit, whatever it is, but it comes out of fullness, and it just has a very different energy. And so there's less the grasping, there's this overflowing abundance.
I love the word abundance, and I was not to interrupt you there,
Yeah,
but
no, I love it.
I was gonna ask you, do you think that it is a choice that we can make, that we can look at something, have a conscious choice to see the abundance in it or the lack in it? And depending on what we're focusing on there, how does that then influence our experience of that thing?
Totally. I mean, it's a classic thing, is the glass half full, half empty. We could say we have a choice. It's a little more subtle. Yes, we do have a choice, but we have habits and, frameworks of habits, and we have certain personalities, or for whatever reason, our childhood, we grew up in a poor environment, deprived, we never felt enough. So there's like this hunger. So it's multi-layered, but yeah, at any point we can catch ourselves and say, wow, I'm focusing on what I don't have. Let me notice actually what do I have? And that's why the gratitude practice is so life transforming, when we start practicing and counting our blessings, and it becomes a vicious cycle of positivity, because there's gratitude just in our ability to express and feel gratitude. And so, it becomes that cycle of positivity. And but to reverse our negativity mindset, and neuroscientists talk about our negativity bias, that our brains almost inherently have a negativity bias because it helps us survive in the jungle. We are looking out for danger and, whatever it might be, the lion or the snake, and that helps us survive. And that works fine in the jungle where we have momentary stressors and then we decompress. But when we get into this negativity bias chronically, then it burns out our system with cortisol and adrenaline and so on. And we're constantly, chronically. So, what we have to do is consciously take in the good, as some neuroscientists say. And so, when there's a danger, you look at it, okay, it gets your body alert, you can react, it moves you into peak performance and so on, so you can respond. But then you got to take 30 seconds and few deep breaths to take in the good, whether it's a beautiful flower or a sunset or a painting or a delicious meal, a piece of art, a connection with loved ones, family, friends, whatever it is. And so we really have to be intentional to take in the good to counteract the biological evolutionary bias that our bodies and psyche have. So it's a choice, but it takes work.
Totally. What are some practical ways that you can start practicing gratitude? I mean, as simple as, a 5-minute journal reflection
Yeah, that's
or
great. Yeah, I wake up every day. The first thing out of my mouth is thank you, life, for the gift of another day. It's just like we take life for granted, but it's a gift. And then, as you said, at the end of the day, a gratitude journal. And then the next thing I recommend to my client is not just at the end of the day, do a gratitude journal. Try and catch yourself during the day and share that appreciation because it multiplies. So, right now I'm really grateful for your warm smile. And when I share it, it feels good. I connect with you deeper, and I see your smile widens and there's more of a spark in your eyes. Now, I could just note that to myself and say, oh, I'm really appreciating Ashley's smile and welcoming presence here. But you know, I know some people freak out because it could feel intimate or whatever. But I think when we share that gratitude with people in real time, then the gratitude deepens for us and for them, and our connection and trust deepens.
I love that, and that's something too our mutual friend Oleg Lukid is very big on as well, that gratitude sharing with one another. It's always worth it to share the thing with somebody, right? Sometimes we think, okay, we don't share it, but we think it, and it's only until a certain time then we decide to share the gratitude. But I know for me how it feels when somebody, like you just said, if you say, oh, your smile, say something about your smile, or if you see somebody out somewhere and they, make a comment about something and it just brightens your day. And it doesn't take much to do it. And it's like it can mean a lot to them, but also to ourselves as well, too, where it feels good to be able to share that with one another. And I think we need more of that, Yossi.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, I try and make a point, like in the supermarket checkout line, to appreciate the cashier and how they were efficient and friendly, etc. And it just creates a moment of connection, and it feels good to me and to them. And it's so critical also in intimate relationships. I mean, one of our love languages is appreciation. People are living together or partnered for years and start taking each other for granted, and it's like, you never appreciate me. Of course I appreciate you. You make me coffee every morning. You bring it, but do I take a moment to acknowledge that, to hold your hand and look in your eye and say, oh, thank you for this or that. And so I'm now actually doing research on spiritually intelligent relationships with couples and bringing this notion beyond the leadership domain and looking at how spiritual intelligence, emotional intelligence, and attachment theory all play into relational satisfaction. And the preliminary results are very exciting. And as we can, attachment, we kind of inherit from the first 2, 3 years of life, and we have our attachment style. And some people are anxious, some people are avoidant. half or so are what's called secure. And when we are anxious or avoidant or our partner, it really affects the dance of love with our partner. And that's kind of, you might say, we're stuck with it. I mean, yeah, you can work on it over the years, but if we have spiritual intelligence, we can make up for that. And in my research so far, it's showing that it has as much or bigger effect than our attachment style. So yeah, all these things of sharing the appreciation, being present with our partner, with our kids, with our friends, with our colleagues at work. So many of us are distracted by our phones. We're so much competing for our attention, text messages, social media, whatever.
There is so much there's so much distraction everywhere, so much influence everywhere. It can be very overwhelming. I think just in this conversation too, it's such a reminder that these are small shifts that we can make where it doesn't have to be, okay, now you just do a total, 180 and you got to change all of these things, but you can actually start very small and see the impacts that it can have in your life and in your relationships.
For sure, for sure. And it's a practice, just like if you want to get in shape. I mean, you were an athlete and you can overdo it. And I have a friend who's training for an ultra marathon and she's been overdoing it and kind of injured herself. And now she can't participate in the race because that she's been training so hard because she overextended herself. That's the extreme, but we all know that if you want to get fit, you have to exercise, and it takes discipline. And the same with presence, with gratitude, with appreciation, with all these things.
I think it's really interesting too because it translates in so many areas of life, and I'm curious your take on this too, coming back to self and checking in with your own capacity. Like, I know what that's like as an athlete to overtrain to then get injured, where you think this is good because I'm going so hard, and then actually can have the reverse effects. But what happens whenever I pause in the process of that training, check in with myself, even tapping into some of these practices that you mentioned earlier too. And then how does that alter the rest of my training and then ultimately my performance on the day of the event or whatever it may be?
Totally, totally. And yeah, our body has a lot of wisdom. We have intuition. We normally think that our intelligence is just the brain cells in our skull. But now science suggests and shows that besides the millions and billions of neurons in our skull, there are millions of neurons in our gut and in our heart, and they all collaborate. So we can rely on our intuition and we slow down and check in with our body. It's like, am I overextending myself or not? So we abandon ourselves without checking in with ourselves and our body and ignoring our intuition, and our body's starting to ache and we think, no, I'm going to push through it. And there's kind of I don't know, a macho attitude, or it's not really related to gender, but we think I can be a hero by ignoring my pain. And
I'm just laughing because I know firsthand what that's like, thinking that I can be a hero in my athletic journey, right? And then I ended up injuring my shoulder to the point where I eventually had to get surgery. And I think back of all the times I ignored the signals. I was having recurring dislocations, and it would happen once, then it would happen again, and then again, and again, and again, and again. And it's like, how many times until you're like, okay, let me pay attention to this thing. And ultimately then it set me back in that way.
Yeah, we ignore the signal and the body screams louder. And I have clients that do that and they ignore, and I've had some clients that get a heart attack. And only then did they change their lifestyle, and it's like, okay, well, how far do you have to go before you pay attention?
So, I have a question on that because I think sometimes we're resistant to change. If we're so
Yeah.
used to doing something a certain way, and so there's comfort in the familiarity. So how can people learn to trust the moments of change rather than fearing that and being resistant to it?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, yeah, as you said, it's familiar. We take on an identity. I'm a hardcore athlete and, I'm tough and I push myself. Other people are weak and like, no, I'm not going to give up. So It's a discernment and learning to discern that, it's like there's the serenity prayer. How does it go? God help me accept the things I can't change and
I
make the
have that
thing.
on a rock.
Yeah, okay, beautiful. So sometimes we have to quote unquote let go and surrender, but what we're surrendering is we're surrendering to the greater intelligence of something, and sometimes we have to persist, and it's knowing the difference that's wisdom. Now, how do we do that? I think sometimes we can associate surrender with resignation. We get confused, like, okay, am I resigning? Quote unquote, giving up. But when we resign, it feels like a collapse, and there's a
Mm,
shrinking, and there's a numbness. It's like I've had a client that was working on his business, over 10 years. His dream was to build it, take it public. But after a dozen years, the growth stalled, even though it was tens of millions of dollars and hundreds of employees. And, he, a year ago, some other company came to him larger and said, "Hey, do you want to merge? We'll acquire you." And he was like, "No, I'm not giving up. My dream is to take it public." So he persisted, and then he was burned out. He's like, "This is too hard." And he was switching to resignation, which is like, "I'm just going to quit, giving my life to this company. I'm just going to walk away and I don't care." And that felt like a resignation collapse. And before that, it was willfulness. No, I'm not selling. I am determined to grow this company so I could take it public, which is coming from his egoic ambition. But
mm,
then when I asked him, okay, what other possibilities, if you think about the bigger picture, what would your customers and employees benefit from? Then he was like, "Oh, well, maybe merging with a larger entity that has more resources and a critical mass to help our customers more and be good for our employees." So as he kind of surrendered to that possibility, he started to open up, and his like eyes brightened up as there are new possibilities. So he was, in a way, surrendering his egoic ambition of just insisting to be a public company CEO, but he was accepting this bigger invitation of what life in a bigger sense. So, on the one hand, when you were kind of forcing it through your ego, then the tightness and your jaw tightens and your muscles and your body's going into fight or flight response. When you but that's not aliveness, it's not ease. The best martial artists are really soft, and
mm.
there's a lot of aliveness and flow. Then on the other side, there's resignation, which is a collapse and a deadening that way. So if you start to pay attention, when you're really working with life, what life's inviting you, and instead of willfulness, you move into willingness to accept
Mm.
life's invitations.
I love that. It's very expansive posture.
Yeah.
I feel like you're just open to the possibilities. I think, there's just I always think sometimes, as being by the beach, by the water, by the ocean, we were just talking about this, a bit offline, but I think about that, where sometimes depending on where you are in your perspective of the ocean, you only see so much until you step out a little bit further and a little bit further. And then it's like, whoa, your whole world just opens up in a way. And I love that picture. And like being in real life, I feel very grateful to, be able to go to the ocean in that way. But that's what it does to me. It reminds me of just the vastness and how much is out there.
The possibilities. Yeah.
So good. Well, this has been awesome, Yossi. I really appreciate your time and being here and having this conversation. Feel very inspired by it. And just, again, all of the possibilities and the discoveries, whenever we go inward and open ourselves up to life in that way. So I really appreciate all of your insights and your willingness to be here and to share with us.
Yeah, it's a pleasure and honor and delight. So it's delightful to be here with you and have this conversation.
Thanks so much.